Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Think Business Live. I'm looking forward to talking with Joe Macleod. Joe, it's great to connect with you. I love this podcast. I get to talk to people from all over the world. You're calling in from Sweden, and it's great to connect with you. I know it's 6 p.m. there. You you got a great company, and I'm excited to talk about it. You're the founder of andEnd, and the website is andEnd.com. Think community, listen up. There are, because of what's going on in the world today, there are layoffs and there are people who are being let go. And, I always it's interesting. I always look at letting people go as an act of courage. And because sometimes, you have to be pretty courageous to let somebody go if you can't find the right seat for them, so they can maybe go find something better that's better suited for them. And so sometimes, though, I don't think people are as conscious about letting people go, and they do it in a very harsh way. And I know that less is more when letting people go, because you're keeping yourself safe from lawsuits and things of that nature. But what your company specializes in, and again, you're the founder of andEnd, you're the world's first product ending business dedicated to helping companies create the best offboarding experiences for their customers. So let's talk about that. I've done over 1,400 interviews, Joe, and I've never interviewed an offboarding specialist. And so talk to me about that.
Well, thanks, John. Thanks for having us on the show. Yeah, it's a crazy concept, isn't it? I mean, it sounds ridiculous. It's taken me a long time to get my head into it. I've been researching the thing. Before I'd done this crazy job, I actually had a proper job building products, services, digital products in different companies, big and small, and shipping them all around the world. And I started getting into this in terms of getting an emotional closure as an experience, but that can be part of a good thing. But then I got into it in a bit of a deeper way and started to think, what's it like to have an ending experience as a good thing, as a great emotional bonding positive experience? And digging into this sort of opened up this whole world. So I've been digging into it for like nearly 10 years now. Written 2 books about it, which I think you'll have in the show notes. And yeah, it is important. It's critical. And why I'm talking to people like you, John, is that we need to do this in all our businesses for better business. It's not just about losing customers or losing that product relationship. You can make your business better by doing good endings.
Yeah. And talk about, let's rewind that for a minute, right?
Sure.
The mental state of getting ready for that, the flow of how that works from the boardroom to the to the actual letting of somebody go and ending that, to how you then talk to the company about it. Can you talk a little bit about that? I remember, it's interesting, I was sharing, not to be a podcast number dropper, but
yeah,
I'm at about over 1,400 episodes, and one of the very first episodes I did was with Howard Behar, who was a former president of Starbucks, and he wrote a great book called it's not about the coffee, or it's not just about the coffee. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he talked about on the podcast. He was one of my very first 4 guests, and he talked about that he had to let people go. And it was, I think some of this I may be getting wrong, but this is the gist. And I think it was about 1,500 people. And he had the list, and he somehow got lost, and somebody got their hands on it. So they had this emergency meeting with all of these higher ups as far as, at Starbucks, what they were going to do and how they were going to quote unquote spin it. Right. I'm putting some of my own words into it. And then his executive assistant at the meeting said, Howard, why don't you just tell him the truth? And so he said, oh, what a brilliant idea. So he went and he told everybody the truth. And he said everybody was just like, even the people that were getting let go were just appreciative of it. Right. And that's why they called him the soul of Starbucks. That was kind of his nickname, Howard Behar. But this reminds me of what you're talking about, reminds me of what Starbucks did in that moment.
So that's a good point. I mean, I focus on the product consumer offboarding experience, but certainly it's got relationships and links into the emotional experience of the human experiencing and ending. So going back to the boardroom and how I engage with businesses, it's actually quite a difficult journey for me to start to get into a business. So it takes a long time. The first thing I've got to do is undo many decades of business culture that says, don't let anyone leave in any way you can. So you trap them in the business. And we've got this habit of like stopping people leaving for any desperate measure.
Yeah.
But this has created some pretty bad behavior. And I think I'm not saying this is businesses do it. I think businesses get blamed a lot for it, but it's a cultural, societal perception actually. And I dig into that at the beginning in the first book.
Tell everybody the names of your two books.
Oh yeah, so the first one is called Ends. Why we overlook endings for humans, products, services, and digital, and why we shouldn't. That came out in 2017. You can get that on Amazon. It's an ebook, it's a paperback, and it's audiobook. And the second book is called Engineering, in terms of engineering ends, as it were. So that's a pretty unique word. If you look that up, you can find me anywhere on the internet for that. That's came out last year, the end of last year, and that is how to do it. So if you're interested in building much better endings for your business, you can look into that book and get loads of tips in there. And coming back to the boardroom thing, so a lot of businesses, once they get into the idea, and usually I have to do a talk with them, and I talk them through and coach them through the beginning of it, they get hooked into it, and then they see loads of benefits that they can really get into.
Yeah.
So, for example, I think there's a lot of businesses, on the top of my head, a lot of businesses are dealing with circular economy, sort of sustainability strategies at the moment. They dig into materials, efficiencies, manufacturing efficiencies. They really forget the consumer experience. And in that, they forget their brand equity. So what we often have is consumers having great onboarding experiences, great usage experiences, terrible ending experiences. That's what the consumer walks away with, that memory of the bad ending. And the brand equity that gets lost in this sort of stuff's chronic. And we have conversations in business about how we can change that into a positive experience at the end, and the consumer can go off with really good embedded memories, not terrible embedded memories.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect of it. I could go on to many more. I don't know what particular angle you want me to.
I love it. I think, just to give the flavor and for people almost to just be aware that there actually is a company and a specialist out there that works with them on the, on the onboarding, the offboarding of people. Talk a little bit about the mindset of what it does for the person who's maybe being offboarded, and what it does for their colleagues for when they leave. Because I always think, I think, again, this is my gut, but I always think when somebody gets let go, or when somebody leaves a company, sometimes the offboarding can leave such a lingering effect if done poorly. And then sometimes you often see one or two other people leave because of where I think if it's done right, you can actually retain more people. So can you talk a little bit about your studies there?
Sure. So in terms of employment stuff, we have a really good onboarding efforts by loads of good HR people and loads of cool companies. I mean, I've worked at a few companies, and you get a great first day, don't you? When your desk is all presented to you, your brand new computer, your tote bag with your sketchbook and pens and all sorts of things in it. Then you get taken out with the new gang that you're going to form. You have a sort of social bonding with them, and then you work on stuff together, and that can create this bonding as you go on further and further into your relationship with that company and all of these people. And that's the ideal, isn't it? That we bond with these people and we become lifelong partners and friends. And what tends to happen when there's a really good book called Role Exit by Helen Rosa Barr, and she talks about this thing as we leave roles. And you can leave a role in in any sort of aspect of life, whether that be a husband or a wife, or you be a policeman or a robber or any sort of job, you have this thing that she observed we called the crack of doubt. And what will happen is there'll be an event at work, and all of a sudden it will sort of crack your relationship with your own role in that place. And then that crack gets opened up further and further as more evidence starts to emerge that you're not suited for this role. And we do this in our personal relationships. As your first dating experiences, you'll have these cracks of doubt, and you'll see relationships start to break apart. So what she found was that you'll go through this process until you reflect, until you come to a feeling that, okay, I'm going to leave. And we also have this in our consumer relationships. We have these cracks of doubt about a product, service, digital product, and then that gets reinforced until we decide, I'm going to move on. And at that point, it's actually very empowering, that moment of feeling like, okay, I'm free of this role. I'm going to look for new roles. And then what she found was that people will play out these new roles. So there'll be a period in that thing between the last job dying or the last role dying and finding a new role where you'll be quite free, you'll be adventurous, you'll play out these new roles in different, whether that be in employment or personal relationships. And that's a very empowering moment for people. So there's a lot to be gained out of that in terms of really wondering what you're going to do in your future. And then you get a new role and you start to get into that new role as well.
Yeah, I love it. How does somebody, you talked a little bit about, how you kind of fell into the business a little bit, but kind of rewind a little bit further of what you did to that, how you knew early on you built some of the, the skill sets you needed to actually be in this world. So when you finally figured it out, it kind of all resonated and fell into place.
Yeah, exactly. So what I found was many years ago, actually, I was teaching, and I set a project. It was sort of a cliche design project about waste and rubbish in the world. And I said to the students, go away and create something about this. And they all came back with more stuff, like more waste and rubbish in the world. And I thought at that point, we just haven't got a vocabulary about ending things or having a philosophical vocabulary around not creating things.
Yeah.
And so I started digging into this, and it started emerged and reformed and stuff. And then I started researching the End's book, and I really started with a history of death. I mean, this seems incredibly morbid, but it is our biggest ending that we'll experience on our lives, obviously, even as a witness. And then digging into that and how that's matured over centuries. And I really gravitated to the Industrial Revolution as a cornerstone, because that's where the big consumer boom really started to happen as we started manufacturing things. The emergence of marketing and how that changed as it moved from a European type of psychology into an American type of psychology with the additional of abundance as the America was experiencing at the time. And so these sort of social cues were going on. And I think we really miss out these sort of sociological issues, which are the undermining sort of foundations of what we're doing in consumerism. And what we try and do in consumerism is do these very surface level improvements. And what we need to do is reflect more deeply about what's the sociological stuff going on underneath the surface of this. And so that was very much what happened in the first book. And so I started to get my foundations, my philosophical touch points, as it were. The second book came from having lots of conversations over the following years at conferences. I've done loads of talks, I've done loads of training, met lots of companies. And then I started to think, okay, I'm going to have to lay down the foundations of this, is what you do as a product developer if you want to do a good ending. So that's the second book, Engineering, how do we do it? And what's the benefits for business?
Yeah. It's so interesting. You talk about how you looked at death and then you built this business a little bit. My wife is a nurse by trade, but she does energy healing, and she only works with hospice patients who are about to cross over but won't let go, and she does energy healing on them that allows their body to kind of have a peaceful passing. And and it reminds me a little bit of your work, right? Like the end doesn't have to be as horrible or as scary as I think people think. And I think what I love about what you're doing is you're changing the level of consciousness about it and awareness that it actually is something that I think a lot of people don't think about, right? It's like they think about the end as always being bad or, a bad experience, but it really doesn't have to be. So I appreciate you building a
Absolutely.
career around it. Yeah.
I think your wife's probably got lots of insights. I've done a lot of work with hospices and research into that, and it's very similar. The sort of avoidance of ultimately reflecting on our death, especially in medical industry, where it's a lot about intervention. The relationship you have at end of life is really profound, really important to grapple with that. And similarly, I'm sure to what your wife probably says is that we need to talk about endings more, whether it be physical death or emotional consumer product endings, that we don't talk about endings much.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Quick speed round for you, Joe. A book that's had the biggest impact on you.
There was a book I read many years ago called The Act of Creation by Arthur Koestler. It talked about how creative acts happen in all sorts of aspects of life. I think it's a really important thing to respect other genres and people in other industries equally. We don't share enough between industries and get a bit bogged down in that. So Act of Creation by Arthur Koestler. It's a beautiful philosophical read.
Best piece of wisdom you've ever received?
Whoa, that's a big one. Oh, God. I mean, it sounds a bit of a cliche, but I think we worry too much in the world. I often used to go into work every day and think, I'm glad I'm not a doctor because, I'm just kicking around ideas. Like,
correct.
Go back to your wife's thing. She's doing real work, like doing this sort of stuff.
She's doing great. I agree.
Yeah.
I often am thankful that I wasn't smart enough to be a doctor. I failed every pre-med class I took, and it was a blessing. Finish this sentence. One thing everybody can do to be more conscious about letting people go is?
I think of the end. I always say that to all the businesses I start with right at the beginning is like, okay, start thinking about the end. And that starts to open their mind up a little bit more. And so I think it's critical.
It's one of my favorite Coveyisms. Start with the end in mind.
Yes.
I think people have applied it to letting people go. So and this can change. Think community. What Joe's talking about really is really enlightening. And as much as I'm a business coach, I'm in companies, and I've talked about being conscious about letting people go and this and the other. You're really opening my eyes too, because I usually think about it, and I'm coaching people when it's happening, not to rewind it and really say, hey, start changing the way you actually approach it in general. I can name a couple companies who do what you're talking about in an incredible way that I work with. But you've opened my eyes to expand the conversation. And as I know you probably are with many companies that you go to, because it changes, to me, as I'm hearing you talk, it really changes the intent of everything, which raises the awareness of everything, which changes the frequency and the vibration of everything, which then elevates the culture and everybody else in it. So I really appreciate, Joe, you sending and sharing your thoughts and wisdom. Think community, if Joe can help you, Joe, tell everybody who your ideal clients are and where they can connect with you, and again, buy your books.
Okay, so I would like to get in touch with Lego. Right now, I've had some great clients this year. I've been with Volvo, Booking.com, Microsoft. But yeah, I think companies like Lego, Apple. I'd like to work with some big airlines. I haven't worked with any airlines. I think they've got a lot of work they could do with endings. And also sort of like the EU and the US in terms of Green New Deal. I think there's a lot of stuff that can be done in terms of the experience of the end for consumerism and how we grapple with problems with climate change and stuff.
Yeah, it's great. All right. Well, I appreciate you taking time to enlighten all of us. Think community. If Joe can help you, please reach out. If I can help you, please reach out to me at johndwoskin.com. Joe, thanks so much. That was great.
Thank you very much, John.